The Accursed People is read by the author. Chapter 1. Rashan, the life goddess of Liata, was lonely. Though there were air breathers elsewhere in the world, Rashan took it upon herself to create the first air breathers of Liata. Rashanans, so dubbed by her fellow gods, who soon followed her example by creating the remaining Liatans, were a curious hybrid. Humans with elongated lifetimes and the slightly pointed ears of the elves of Kordasar, a continent north of Liata. In appreciation for the generous gift of life, female Rashanans raised their daughters in the traditions of the life goddess. It is very unfortunate to say that over the ages, with each modern progression, such traditions were easily neglected, and as time passed, as folks became more corruptible by the surrounding world, were soon forgotten. There were still those who continued on in these traditions. This was one reason that 17-year-old Kanura admired her grandmother Trina, Aypahtoh. She had been, and still was, an intensely dedicated servant of Rashan. There were other reasons to admire Aypahtoh. When Aypahtoh's husband died, she'd moved in to help her daughter Antona with the little ones, and served as village elder. There was also a time that she would travel when the occasion or the servitude called for it. Age no longer allowed her body to keep up with her mind, sharp as it was. Age, it seemed, was slowing her down. Antona had once been a priestess of Rashan, but, like Trina, felt a calling stronger than any other, the one to be a mother. She left the order to become pregnant, vowing to return as her mother had returned once her children were grown. Though Kanura and Creon knew nothing of a father, neither Mom nor Aypahtoh had ever been clearer than mud on the issue. And though there had been plenty of suitors willing to take that role, all Antona said was that she would not remarry unless she found somebody who could love her children as much as he loved her. Not that it was possible for anyone to love us that much, except maybe Aypahtoh. Aypahtoh, meaning crone, was something that Kanura and her brother Creon teasingly called their grandmother years and years ago. It had stuck remorselessly and become a term of endearment. Speaking of, Kanura glanced into the living room, worry written across her lovely features. Aypahtoh sat in the rocking chair her late husband had crafted her as a nuptials gift. The old woman was dozing. "Mother, what ails her?" Antona shushed. "She'll hear you." After which, she added quietly, "If she wants us to know, she'll tell us. It's her right as elder to keep a secret or two." Creon shuddered. "I don't ever want to get old. I want to be this young forever. Maybe if I become a priest of Rashan." Kanura laughed louder than necessary, ending it in a snort. "You know the order would never allow you to serve." She didn't bother to mention that belonging to the order would not give him eternal youth. He shrugged, holding back a laugh. "I don't care. I'd make them accept me. I'd blaze the trail for other men." "Consider yourself a man, do you?" Kanura winked. Their mother laughed as Kanura cleanly slid a knife into a carrot several times, then dumped the pieces into a pot waiting on the stove. Kanura sobered as her mother and Creon continued to babble about the servitude and tuned them out. 2 months ago, when the healer last came, Aypahtoh asked for the treatments to stop. As a steward to the public, the healer had complied. But, as a healer and friend, she'd been extremely hesitant. She'd furthermore added that Trina would be able to live much longer with the herbal remedies in her system, with even less pain. Kanura begged for a change of heart, despite knowing it was only a matter of time. But Trina was adamant. She'd said she was ready and had been for many years. Day after day, Kanura watched as her grandmother's willowy figure hunched, her teeth and face began to decay, becoming shells of their former glory. Her hair had seemed to gray overnight, and her fingers, once adept in many things, were now gnarled and twisted. She ached and slept almost constantly. Today was one of her better days. She'd gone with them to the fairy berry patch. They picked and ate berries until they nearly popped, then had a nice picnic in the patch, where Creon saw a fairy for the first time. It was surprising he could see her, since she practically blended in with the rest of the plant, dress and hair colored the same as the berry blossoms, her skin the same as the leaves and stems. The little fairy was watering a stem not far from them. He peered at the thumb-sized woman enthralled. As if she sensed them, the fairy slowly turned. Surprise registered across her face as she shrieked, dropping her watering can. She flew off in a huff, Creon staring after her. Aypahtoh had laughed. Who did you think tends these crops? The life slicing through her finger painfully brought her back to reality. Ouch! Creon chuckled and tossed her a clean rag. I always wondered what your secret ingredient was. She feigned a jaunt at him with the knife before wrapping her bleeding finger. Aypahtoh hobbled into the kitchen. Though she never showed it, they knew it pained her to move. She winked at Kanura. You think you're klutzy now. Just wait about 40 or 50 years. Creon said again, I'm never aging. Of course he was only joking about joining the servitude. It was something strictly for women. He'd not met a man yet that wanted to. On the other hand, he wondered why Kanura hadn't mentioned how she'd wanted to join the servitude. He'd heard her prayers, and it was obvious from the way her eyes glistened when Aypahtoh told them old expedition stories. The only thing he really and truly craved was adventure, a chance to put his magic to the test. He and his sister dueled at least once a day, but that was different. He'd felt he'd had to hold back. He didn't want to kill her. Kanura had come dangerously close to killing him a year ago. An unlikely slip of her blade had seen to that. The healer said that if she had nicked even an inch lower, he wouldn't be alive today. Creon couldn't hold a grudge over an accident. He wasn't sure that she knew it was an accident, that somehow she'd done it on purpose. She emanated a lot of guilt she claimed wasn't there. So he would shrug and forget about it until he next caught her peering at his scar. He would confront her, she would deny it, and that was their process. There must have been a lot on his sister's mind. She hadn't stirred it down in a while. Mumbling, he shook his head. His family had already sat down for dinner. He joined them. Help an old lady to bed, will you? Aypahtoh, you're not that old, Kanura insisted in a squeak. Trina laughed heartily. Oh, dear child, Goddess bless you. She gripped the younger woman's arm tightly as they tread down the hall towards the room Trina and Antona shared. In the room now, with the door closed, Trina became serious. The servitude is not right for you. Kanura stared at her, incredulous. How did you... Aypahtoh held up a withered hand. Her tongue danced across her wizened, cracked lips. A servant of Rashan knows these things. But listen to me closely. She shuffled towards the large trunk at the end of her bed. The one time when Aypahtoh was away that Kanura had gotten enough nerve to sneak a peek inside said trunk, her mother had caught her and given her a good tongue-lashing. Needless to say, but needed to be said, Kanura never tried it again. Anticipation had been building from that day. She remembered the light that had come out so clearly. It was the sort of light that brought calm to a person's soul. Everything after that was the memory of her mother coming in, stopping her and yelling, which today might have made her laugh. Except her throat was lumped and her heart pounded hard against her rib cage. Her eyes widened, breath quickened. Trina motioned her over. The foot of the bed seemed miles away as she floated to the trunk. When she'd snuck in as a child, it had seemed even bigger than it was, gargantuan even. The lid was gilded in the script of the goddess, which, as a non-steward of Rashan, she could not read. Her grandmother translated, for those worthy of her blessings. She maintained her patience, resisting even to twist the strands of silver hair around her long fingers. If age had not been factored in, it was easy to think she and Aypahtoh were, or had been, identical in every way. The lithe, willowy figure that had once been Aypahtoh's now belonged to Kanura. Their eyes were the same hue of lilac, and their hair, aside from Aypahtoh's gray streak, was colored silver as Madame Moon in her fullest, impregnated with the night. Aypahtoh's hair had been in a bun, but fell loose across her cheeks as she seemed to struggle with the lid. Kanura offered her assistance, but Aypahtoh shooed her off. Not even a minute later, the crone lifted it flawlessly. The light, which Kanura remembered so well, lovingly embraced her grandmother like an old friend and drained all effects of age. In that moment, Trina appeared strengthened and younger. She was young again, an identical twin to Kanura, only taller. She reached inside the trunk. Once the light subsided, Kanura saw that Aypahtoh had pulled out a sheathed sword. It hung from a worn, tanned leather belt. Wordless and with reverence, Kanura watched. Even the breeze coming in from the open window dared not stir any further than the window-sill. Aypahtoh slowly removed the ordinary-looking sheath. The sword gleamed in the darkness, casting a soft glow upon their faces. In silent ceremony, Trina held the blade out to her granddaughter, handle first. Kanura was unsure what was expected of her, but then it dawned on her. The sword was hers now. In awe she grasped the silver hilt. An unexplained warmth spread throughout her limbs, pride flooding her aching soul. She looked it over carefully. More words of the ancient script engraved the blade. She didn't need a translation to know it was a blessing. Her left hand absently caressed the blade, the warmth again stretching out to her. She let out a soft breath. Her thumb jolted, unprovoked, activating a switch on the three-pronged hilt, a switch that, before now, had appeared to be a simple, decorative gem. She searched for the result of the activating switch. There it was at the tip. The single blade had separated, forming three new blades, each of them stretched upwards like the fronds of a flower towards the sun. Each blade had sprouted tiny spikes that resembled thorns, reminding Kanura even more of a fatal flower. After a moment she shared this with her grandmother, who chuckled. "That, my dear, is why it is named Fatal Blossom." Charming as the name may be, Kanura still wouldn't want to be at the business end of it. She grinned, swung the sword easily across the air. It would be different from her dagger and her cheap practice blade. Much different. But it would also be special, empowering. The word came from nowhere. While Kanura had been in her dream state, Aypahtoh made it into bed and was sitting up against the pillows. "Come, child, come sit with me while I rest." Kanura nodded and resheathed the sword at her hip. When did I do that? She couldn't remember hooking the belt around her waist. Aypahtoh's hands were shockingly cold. Still, Kanura clutched them tightly. The old woman pulled Kanura closer. She whispered something. Kanura murmured, "Yes, Aypahtoh." She went into the kitchen and summoned her brother and mother to Aypahtoh's bedside. Her mother was stiff, clinging to Creon as they walked down the hall. "What does that mean? What are dark mages? How will I know if I see one?" She paced as she thought. Why do old people always feel the need to be so cryptic? She stifled a giggle. She knew this wasn't the right time, but she wouldn't admit to herself why it wasn't. She didn't want to know that her grandmother was dying. Her thoughts were interrupted by a choked sob. Glancing up, she saw her mother standing in the doorway, a hand at her throat. "Your brother is in with her now, but before you go in, you should know," her eyes swimming with gloom. "This may be the end, so—" Another choked sob. "Just prepare yourself." Kanura nodded in response. It was all she could do to not race down the hall to her grandmother, to beg her to stay, to plead for more guidance or one last picnic. She felt that maybe the sword was keeping her grounded. She heard her mother sobbing as she returned to her grandmother. Creon was on Aypahtoh's right side, holding her hand, so Kanura took her place at the left side, holding the other. Silence loomed over them for nearly 20 minutes before Antona had gathered herself enough to join them again. Aypahtoh had closed her eyes long ago, sleeping perhaps, but it was more likely that she was in the pre-death state. This is the stage in which it is believed the soul leaves the body and prepares for final engagements into the afterworld. Maybe her lost twin light, that is, her husband, was waiting on the other side, or was with her already. Kanura felt sad, her heart most certainly broken, but she still could not bring herself to cry. Not even when the body began radiating light so bright that she, Creon, and their mother needed to raise hands to cover their eyes. Not even when Aypahtoh's body rose limply, swirling into small sparkles of dust, which were then swept out of the house on the breeze, leaving the three of them alone in the room with two empty beds. They took turns behind the changing screen. Neither were in the mood for conversation. It had been a shock to watch their grandmother dissipate, though it had been explained to them as a very natural thing, as just another step in life in which one is so enlightened their body need not hinder them any more. That explanation would never quell the heaviness that had settled in their hearts. Mum had gone straight to bed after— Go ahead, admit it. After Aypahtoh died. Kanura shook her head. She still didn't want to accept it as truth. She heard Creon clean up while she sat on their small balcony pondering the meaning of life. except there didn't seem to be a meaning anymore. Is that really all there is to life, living, procreating, and dying? A little while later, Creon tucked himself into bed. Kanura began to pray. Rashawn, please, I beg of you, help me to understand the words of my grandmother, and please give me the strength to do what is expected of me. Tell me what to do. If you say I must leave, then leave I shall. She climbed into her cot across the room. Kanura's pleas turned to quiet sobs, then finally to calm, quiet breathing. A stirring rose in Creon's soul. Without thinking, Creon slipped from his bed covers and began to pack bags for them both. When he realized what he was doing, he tried to stop, but his body was being controlled by a force stronger than him. He realized then that Kanura must have asked for help, alone on the balcony. Rashawn had decided to use him as a steward after all. If you enjoyed Chapter 1 of The Accursed People, please subscribe for more.